Hello, and welcome to the Six Figure Developer Podcast, the podcast where we talk about new and exciting technologies, professional development, clean code, career advancement, and more. I'm John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I'm John Ash.
With us today is Cecil Phillip. Cecil is a cloud advocate at Microsoft, podcaster, teacher, swimmer, and music lover. Born and raised in Antigua, he now calls Fort Lauderdale, Florida, his home. Welcome, Cecil.
Hey everyone, how you guys doing?
Doing real well. So before we kind of jump into the meat of things, would you just give us maybe a little introduction to yourself? Sort of like maybe tell people how you got started in the industry.
Sure. So like you read a little bit before in my bio. So originally I'm from Antigua, which is like super tiny island in the Caribbean, which people only know about when they go on vacation or on a cruise or something. But I grew up in Antigua, 19 years, came up to the United States for college kind of thing. And when I was at home, I remember my dad, computers weren't like a thing in like high school and stuff, right? I think when I was in high school, like that was a thing in the United States, but for us, we didn't have computers like a room that you could go into and call it like a computer lab. And my dad was like, "Hey, I need to buy like this machine to like write reports and do stuff." And I was like, "Okay, sure, whatever." And he brought home it was a compact Presario. I don't remember the model number, but it was an old compact Presario back when Compaq was still making computers. And then those were the days when computers came with books, right? So this computer comes and it's the monitor, like, and came with everything, right? It came with the monitor, the keyboard, the mouse, like. There was no buy parts separately kind of thing, kind of like what we do today. Like it came with everything, and it came with this whole stash of books, and the books were on like HTML and Netscape Navigator, how to use a browser, like what does this stuff do, and all this types of stuff. And I think one summer I was just super bored, and I'm like, okay, I'll just read these books because they're here, right? And I don't have anything else to do. So I read these books and I learned about HTML. And I figured out how to put my name on the screen, right? Which obviously today is not like super impressive, but to me, like I don't know what this big white box of magic is, right? And so I put my name on the screen, and I'm like absolutely like amazed and flabbergasted. Like I'm calling my friend on the phone, like, "Hey, you need to come over. Like I just put my name on this computer, and like it's crazy. Like you need to see this." I'm telling people, come over, and I'll put your name on the computer too, right? And so ever since then, I've just been really fascinated with how computers work, with how like what's inside of the machine, right? I got very used to like open it up, and used to have like the air can to like spray all the dust out from inside the computer. I would probably still do it, but we used to clean out the computer and all that. And so I got used to open it up and going inside of it and moving stuff around. And I thought, well, hey, maybe I'm gonna go and do like fix computers for the rest of my life, right? So that's what happened. Like I left Antigua, and I thought, oh, I'm going to build computers for the rest of it, and do that type of stuff. And then you come to college, and usually when Caribbean people come to college, and probably the same with a lot of other folks too, you realize the world is so much bigger than it actually is. And I started to see like way more different paths that I could take. And I was like, wait, I could work for Microsoft, like that's a thing. I could write software, and I don't have to be like lifting up machines and doing that types of stuff. Like, I'm like, sure, I want to do that. And so I kind of just went down that rabbit hole, and a couple of years later, lo and behold, I'm at Microsoft.
Okay, and your audio was breaking up there for just a second.
Oh, mine was? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. If we could just either check your video settings and enable HD or touch up performance or touch up appearance, and or maybe
here. Yeah, I'm making sure I don't have anything else running. My computer's frozen.
Yeah,
that's not
That'd be a problem.
We can still see and hear you.
Can you? Okay. Yeah, I'm all locked up. I can't do anything. Let's see what's happening here. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Yeah, I can't move anything. Everything's stuck. It literally, it's like I can move my mouse around. I literally can't do anything else. I don't know what's going on. It is.
Do
I
we
feel
want
like
to
this is a
have him
bad
try
practical
like?
joke. The only thing that I could think is I could shut it down and come back in. I don't know if you want me to do that.
Yeah, I was just about to say if you need to, you can turn it off and on again. We can deal with that.
Let me hop
We'll wait.
out. Okay, I'll hop out and hop right back in.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, no problem.
I gotta see if it'll let me turn it off.
Yeah, apparently it did.
Did you go? Are we still live, or are we like?
Yeah, we're still
on a blank
live.
screen?
I'm gonna stop the Zencaster recording and then I'll start it back up whenever he's back in.
Okay.
So we'll have 2 recordings for this one.
Okay. No
And
problem.
as soon as his screen actually dies, I'll switch over to our 3-screen view instead of a 4-screen view. I guess I could switch to.
And
All right.
we're back.
So, Cecil, you were explaining to us kind of how you got started, coming from Antigua and coming to the States. You're learning all of the you don't have to just physically you don't have to physically
Move
fix
around
computers.
machines
You
and
can yeah.
pull
You got
plugs
all these
and
different
all that stuff.
opportunities. Microsoft being one of them. So how do you come to Microsoft, and what are you doing these days at Microsoft?
It's kind of interesting, to be honest with you, because I tell people I got discovered. I shouldn't say discovered. I got hired to come to Microsoft on Twitter, on social media, which is kind of interesting. It was so. The long story short, at the time, prior to me joining, I was doing a lot of different things. Like I was teaching part time at Miami-Dade College. I just started business. I was doing like online training and video courses and all these types of things. And a buddy of mine, one of my friends that I always bump up with at code camps and things of that nature, put out a tweet and was like, "Hey, we're starting this team. We're hiring people, whatever, whatever." And I'm like, "Get out of here, man! Nobody hires people on Twitter, man. That's not a thing." You know what I mean? Like, who posts his job descriptions on Twitter, right? So I messaged him. I sent him a DM, and I was like, "Well, is it remote? Because I'm not moving. I'm not going to Seattle." And he was just like, "Hold on, let me put you in contact with somebody." For the next hour, I was literally having DMs with this guy back and forth. Like, "Send me a resume. What are you doing? What's this thing? What's that thing?" I think 2 weeks later, I was on a phone call, and then like, I think 2-3 months after that, like I was in Seattle, and that was it. End of story.
Wow.
It's not your typical, this is how I got the job kind of thing, right? So that's kind of how it ended up happening. But when I did my interview, I was there and I'm like, "Hey, do I have to prepare for something? Do you want me to like study an algorithms book, or like what am I supposed to be doing here exactly?" And the people that interviewed me, they were like, "You know what? You've been preparing for this job, your whole career." I didn't understand it until I actually started doing the job. And so for folks that are listening, so I'm a developer advocate, and what we essentially do is a lot of teaching and training. I do a lot of workshops. I do a lot of podcasts and online streaming and those types of things. But the thing is, that's what I was doing before I got that job, right? Like this was like a part-time thing. After work, I'll go to a user group, and after work, we'll go to code camps, and we'll do stuff like that. But that was always something that was coming out of our own pockets. Like I wasn't, I didn't have a company sponsoring those types of endeavors. And so now now Microsoft does, right? So, it's the stuff that you were doing as a hobby, the cool things that you're doing as a hobby, you just, companies now are doing it for you. So when they said that you were doing it your whole career, I was just like, I didn't get it until like I started doing the job, and I'm like, okay, I understand. I totally get it.
That'd be pretty
Very
cool.
cool.
You do you, and we'll just pay you.
Yeah. I mean, which is great, right? And like when I talk to my students, a lot of them always ask me, how do I get to like this certain position, or how do I do this, or how do I do that? And one of the pieces of advice that was given to me, and I always pass on to other people, is, do the job before you get the job, right? Like if you want to be a web developer, then start building web pages, right? Like learn how to do it and like figure it out. You know what I mean? Start putting out real tangible work that people could see. So whenever you do get that position and that opportunity to be in a room with someone else and have an interview, then you could literally like drop the book on them, right? Like you open the book and like, here's my portfolio of work. Here's my my body of work that I've put forward over these past couple of years. And at that point, like what are you gonna do? Are you gonna ask this person to like go and design like something on a whiteboard? Like, you know what I mean? Like here's my work, here's my body of work, my things that are visible, here are my clients, here are the people that I've worked with. And when folks can see that, right, there's really not a long conversation to have at that point.
So how is the lockdown changed things for you? Is it? I would assume it means less travel these days, more online presence, more online training, those types of things, or what does it look like these days?
Yeah, definitely a lot more online types of experiences. So pretty much everything that we had scheduled to be in person was canceled for 2020. probably going into 2021 too, but we'll see what happens. So again, like because of how my team operates, we do a lot of, we had Ignite the Tour, and then there's Build, and then there's Ignite, and like all these other types of things that we get involved with. But now what you'll notice is a lot of my teammates and even myself, we're doing a lot more like streaming on Twitch, like, kind of like what we're doing right now. YouTube Live. A lot of folks are creating tons of workshops and great samples. Some of my teammates are involved in conferences like PyCon. If you take a look at the PyCon page, you'll notice like Microsoft sponsored some of that, and we even have some workshops in there too, right? So we have different folks that are just doing a lot of creating a lot of different content and just finding really unique ways to still be able to connect with people. I can tell you that my team in particular, like I work a lot with the educational aspect of our team, which probably sounds a little like I said that already, but so our team is split up into a lot of different focus areas. So we have folks that are looking at enterprise folks, open source folks. There's internal, and my team in particular, we look and speak to a lot of academics. So I talk to a lot of students. I work with a lot of professors. What are they doing? How can we help update your curriculum to make your students a lot more approachable for jobs and interviews and those types of things? And so particularly what we've been doing now is just, we're doing a lot of that online, right? So, workshops for teachers, having students understand, object-oriented principles, but instead of Java, like we're showing them in C#, right? Like, and doing some of those types of things.
Yeah, I caught you and Clarkio streaming on Twitch, learning and working with Python together. Was that something that just kind of evolved, or was that something that you guys had worked together and planned on presenting, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, so Brian is a teammate of mine that lives in Orlando, and we had one of our I guess you could call it our team offsites, and we were like, hey, we should do something together, but something that's very like ground level, something that we could use to show other developers what it's like to continue learning as like an already, I guess you could say a developer that already has experience, right? So, Brian is pretty well with JavaScript. Like I'm a .NET guy. Like, why don't we come together and learn a new language? Because that's what happens in the real world, right? Like you get put in a position, you got to learn something new, right? And you got to figure it out. And so we're like, hey, well, I've never been paid to write Python, and you've never been paid to write Python. Let's get together and write some Python, right? And so we literally just went on stream. Brian has an existing audience from like other streams and stuff like that he's done. So, we jumped on his channel, we started interacting with his community, and we're like, well, hey, we want to learn Python and we want to have you all watch us do it. So where do we start, right? And so we went online, we looked at a lot of different resources. Should we do videos? Should we do find online workshops? We just like pick up a thing and read through the Python docs. We figured that would be super boring, so we didn't do that. But there's a lot of different options that we have to just try and figure out what was the best option. And so, through that, we just spent the next 6 months, actually it's more than 6 months, probably like the next 9 months, just learning Python and going through that process. And it's been tons of fun. So one thing that we got from that, I could tell you is, obviously the audience has been super into it. They've been really supportive. We have folks that are seasoned Python folks and people that I just want to learn Python because, I want to get into a machine learning thing. I want to build websites with Flask or, whatever the case is. So we get different ranges of age ranges and experience ranges of folks, which has been really interesting. And it's really good to see how interactive they are, right? Because I think that's one of the benefits of Twitch, right? Mm-hmm. When you see people being interactive. It's not like a pre-recorded video. It's not like a big conference talk. It's literally, a bunch of folks in a room and we're just having a conversation. My camera just happens to be on and yours isn't, but we're all just together having a conversation, which is really cool. And so, we'll have folks being able to contribute, suggestions and ideas when we don't have answers. And then also we could take some of the experience that we have with other programming languages and we could be like, well, I assume this is what this means, right? It's kind of like, how many different ways can you write an if statement, right? Like, I'm pretty sure an if statement in .NET and an if statement in Python and an if statement in JavaScript is the same if statement. We just got to figure out what the actual syntax structure of that happens to be. But I'm pretty sure it works the same way, right? And then you kind of go through that process and you learn like the little, nuances between the different languages. And we kind of just take it from there.
What caused you guys to settle on Python?
So Brian and I are both on the academic team, and we chose Python because, and you might have seen some of this in the news, but a lot of countries across the world are standardizing in Python for their computer science education. So if you look at countries like France, in Australia, in Asia, right? Like a lot of their universities and their course curriculums and things of that nature are standardizing on Python. So I'm expecting in the next couple of years or so, there's going to be a huge boom in Python developers, particularly coming from outside of the United States. Even within that space too, right? Like machine learning is a huge thing today. Like you sneeze and you hit like 10 people talking about machine learning. I'm sorry, don't sneeze on anybody. That's not a good thing to do. But you get it, right? Like everybody's within range that you could. Everybody's talking about machine learning, right? Like TensorFlow and PyTorch and scikit-learn, and I want to like do object detection. I want to be able to recognize words on a picture and like all these types of things, right? And Python is the language for that, right? Obviously, other languages can do that as well, but most serious data scientists and most folks that are doing machine learning and AI and anything of that nature know Python, and they're using these Python frameworks. So it kind of makes sense that if this is what a lot of folks are interested in learning about, well, why don't we go through the process of learning about it? Just that now we're coming from the perspective of two folks that know how to program in other languages, and we're going to try and bring that knowledge together.
You think it's a combination of the low barrier to entry, the ease with which one might be able to pick up Python, combined with the width and breadth of the libraries available for machine learning in Python?
I think so. I think if you look at the history of Python, right, because it's been so approachable, like a lot of folks have been using Python for things like predicting stocks, right, financial analysis, and they've been doing that for years, right, long before we even talk about this machine learning thing. Like a lot of folks have just been doing it for basic statistics and data analysis because it's so easy to get started with. Python doesn't have like a project system per se, so that means that I could just have a single file and run it. Versus some other languages, I need like a build system and I need a thing and a file and a config and just to write like hello world, right? So with Python, right, is just you write it in a file and you execute it, right? And then it kind of just it does what you tell it to do. And so because of that expressiveness and how easy it is for you to get into it, a lot of folks that aren't traditional computer scientists or developers or anything like that find it really easy to just go in and crunch numbers, right? And so I think from that perspective, that community continue to grow and grow and grow from financial folks to scientists that just want to calculate results and do like some basic, again, statistical analysis on whatever experiments they're doing. And now those just developed into really good numerical analysis type libraries. So you'll see people use stuff like pandas and NumPy and like those types of languages. But then now we have now we have PyTorch, and now we have scikit-learn and all these things. But if you look at them, like their dependencies are those basic data analysis libraries, right? Like these libraries that we're using to crunch numbers that folks have been using long before machine learning was like a big thing.
Mm-hmm. So if somebody wanted to pick up Python, what version of Python do they get? Because I know a few years ago there was a big divide between like 2 and 3. Is that still a thing, or do people just start with Python 3?
So as of January 1st, 2020, Python 2 is like no longer supported.
Okay.
At least that's what they said. You know how we always say like, we're not going to support Windows XP anymore, and then all of a sudden people are still running Windows XP, right? So Python 2 is no longer supposed to be supported. I know 3 is the way to go here on out. So if you're someone that's concerned about security updates, about language features, and just overall evolution and progression of the language, then I definitely would tell you to start with some version of 3. As we're talking right now, 3.8 or 3.8.2 to be specific is like the latest one that I know of. I think 3.9 is in beta. If you install the latest versions of Ubuntu, if you're a Linux person, I think you get 3.5 out of the box. But again, it's very easy to upgrade. Right. But if you're using some version of 3, right, like I think you'd be pretty good to go.
Okay, and what about Python do you? I mean, you mentioned the lack of need for like a project structure. Like, there's not a big to do to get it running. But is there anything else specifically that's causing it to kind of be the language of choice for learning to program?
Sure. I think the fact that it has a huge base class library, well, we call it base class library, but their default set of tools and utilities that it comes with out of the box just by installing Python makes a big difference. So for some other languages, simple things like a CSV parser, right? Or, being able to run shell commands or, right? Like there's just so much that's in the box by default that it makes it really easy for you to get started with. So I don't have to worry about setting up dependencies for another thing and pulling in an extra package or whatever the case is, right? Like I don't have to download the internet like some other frameworks do. Right? I can kind of just get to it. I mean, you said it, not me, man. I wasn't going to go there. But you said it, so So I think those are the things that make it really, really attractive to folks, right? Like I could download a thing, I could write a single file, and then I could have tons of tools and utilities out of the box that I could use before I have to go and reach out to like third parties to add some additional functionality.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I tried to learn some Python years ago, but it doesn't require functions or namespaces to run a program, right? Like you can just do 1 + 1 and it will add it and give you the results, right?
Yeah, like in Python, you could literally type print, right? Like print 1, right, or whatever, and it would print it, and that's it. Like you can have a 1-word, 10-character line of Python, and maybe even less than 10 characters, right? But like you can have a 1-line Python program, no semicolons, and then it just works.
I don't know if I like that part.
So you guys, you were talking about some of the different ways you guys were looking at learning Python. What route did you ultimately take, and sort of what do you recommend for people trying to like pick up Python?
Sure. So one of the routes that we took was, so we have a lot of different advocates, within Microsoft and within our team specifically. Folks that are focused on Java, JavaScript, folks that are focused on like Docker and open source and different types of things. And so we chose to go with one of our teammates' resources that she created, which is absolutely amazing. Her name was Nina Zakharenko. And, she has tons of great resources online for learning about Python. She has paid courses that you should definitely check out if you're into that. And so, I was like, well, let's support our teammate, right? Like first is like finding some third party person. And so that's what we did. And so, she has a great course. You can go through it week by week. It's split up into modules, and it talks about different things from like what's conditional logic, right? Like if statements and ands and ors, and it goes all the way down to building something with Flask, right? Like a very simple like web service kind of thing. So yeah, so if you folks want to check it out, I mean, we could always send you the links and stuff like that, but that worked out pretty great. I could tell you, so now we're done with that. And, we're looking for more content to kind of move forward with our stuff. And I think what me and Brian both realized is that like, there's just like so much happening in the Python ecosystem. Again, regardless of whether you want to do machine learning or not, I know everyone is talking about that, and that's a huge space for them. But there's so many other interesting things that you could do. Like I just watched one of the PyCon talks just yesterday, and there's this guy talking about this toolkit called Ray that does distributed systems programming and makes it a lot easier in Python. Now, I mean, I've never really thought about Python as a distributed systems type framework, right? But I'm like, okay, cool. Maybe that's the thing, right? And maybe that's the space that, again, people are starting to get into more because, if you're doing data science, you're talking about crunching large amounts of numbers, right? And so I could see a need for you wanting to, divide and conquer, right? And spread that work out across multiple machines and being able to do like a fan out and aggregate them back in, right? And seeing, it's like some of those types of workloads you want to do. We see a lot of folks writing things like parsers with Python. And again, obviously the web space is big too with Django and everything else. So we're like, I think we're just gonna, I think week by week, we're just gonna be like, hey, well, what do we want to talk about today? Like, what do we want to learn about now? And then kind of just do it, right? Like, do we want to learn about data access with, I don't know. I think a lot of Python folks use PostgreSQL. let's do that, right? Or Mongo engine, right? Or something like that. Let's go online and like have everybody watch us make mistakes as we like mess around and like try to get this thing to work.
That's where I'm sure it's really beneficial to get those that have a lot of Python experience on your channel in the chat, talking about probably best practices. Maybe you don't want to do it this way. Maybe there's other alternatives, right?
Yeah, for sure. And when you come from another language, so your best and your worst learning tool is your experience, right? From the perspective of you're gonna try and map what you know to another language's contracts, right? And so maybe that might help you to get up to speed with it faster, but then that might not be necessarily idiomatic to how that ecosystem plans for you to use certain features, or maybe there's easier ways or better ways to do it. And that's where learning becomes like a social thing, right? Like I could learn by myself in a corner in a vacuum and write like a really bad code and think this is the best thing ever, right? Because I wrote it and no one else has gotten to see it. But then when you talk to other people and they're like, yo, you took 20 lines of code to write this, man. Like we have a function that does this. Like you don't need to do that. Like, oh, okay. Well, nobody told me that, right? Like we could have had this conversation a long time ago. But that's where the social aspect comes in, right? Like we talk to each other and we share ideas and we collaborate. And that's how we all grow as an ecosystem, right? As an industry, right? Like we have to be able to be open and have those types of conversations.
So you mentioned earlier that you're a .NET guy. But in discovering Python and going through it and learning it, what other than say machine learning or something like that, what are the sort of the scenarios or problems that you think that it's like well equipped to solve?
Sure.
Why would you pick it up opposed to like leaning back on JavaScript or .NET or something like that?
Sure. So kind of going back to one of the core goals that me and Brian had, because we work a lot with students, high school and college level and things of that nature. And when you talk about going to students and having them learn programming in a very intimidating way, it's something that's very like easy to jump into and easy to get going with. Like Python's a great language for that, right? Python's a great language for people that I don't know programming and I don't have a computer science degree and I don't have tons of experience with, I don't know, algorithms and data structures and like all these fancy types of things. Like I can kind of just get in and get started and get going, right? And I think the hello world experience, right? Like the getting started experience is a huge thing that we don't really think about a lot when we look at programming languages, right? Like, so imagine, like, I don't know if you folks have kids, right? But imagine you had kids and your kids are like less than 10, right? What language would you want to put them in front of? Would you want to put them in front of Java or you want to put them in front of Python? Right? But I mean, not that there's anything wrong with these languages, but it makes you think about like how approachable these things are. Sure. You know what I mean? Like, do you want to give your son a bicycle first or do you want to give him a motorcycle? Right? Like what level of complexity are we trying to enter in and like evolve up to? And so, so for me, like, it's a great teaching tool, right? It's a great tool for like understanding and prototyping ideas. Again, outside of the machine learning space. I think when folks want to get into web development too, it's very strong in that space as well. If you just want to have like really simple websites, I know a lot of folks write static site generators with Python. I think the New York Times are the folks that created Django, if I'm not mistaken. And so, they wrote Django as like their Python web engine. And that's, I think it's now like since, just an open source project now, but, like a company made Django for the sake of, hey, I want to have like a use-based website, right? And so they had their own patterns and practices that they wanted to write into how they did their jobs. So again, like outside of machine learning, like there's tons of applications there that folks use for Python.
And to be fair, I wanted to get my son a motorcycle, but my wife put a stop to that pretty quick.
Well, you can always hide it by your neighbor's house.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted, while you're going over that, I kind of want to say, well, there's a difference between want and should.
That's true. That's true.
So I was doing some work with a company that's heavy into data analytics and data science, and they're putting together a software as a service offering in Azure, utilizing things like Azure Data Factory and Logic Apps and Azure SQL and SSIS and all kinds of offerings in the Azure space. And they're actually were having conversations about standardizing on Python because they were so data heavy and had such deep knowledge and background in the space. They could use things like their Jupyter notebooks. They could use Python in Azure Functions for doing small data manipulations. That, you know, the tooling and the availability in the cloud space is there as well for anybody that has that knowledge.
Yeah, it's great. And I remember a couple companies ago, one of the use cases that we had for Python. So I used to work for an HR company a while ago, Ultimate Software. And what they used to do was they would embed Iron Python. So Iron Python was Python running on .NET. And they would embed Python in .NET as like a rules engine, right? So instead of you scripting .NET, which is, you know, we all know how that is, right? Like you'd use something like Python, which again, it's very light syntax. And I could literally write like 1 or 2 lines. I don't need a whole project system. I don't need a lot of stuff, right? So I could import like 3 lines of strings, right? And evaluate it, right? And then get some output, right? And it'll do some work. In terms of a lot of folks do that for Python. I think SQL Server today, or some version of SQL Server, ships with Python in the box. So if you want to do Python work in SQL Server, that's a thing. You could do that. There's a lot of other Azure services that support it as well. Like, you know, Azure ML supports it. Obviously, if you use Jupyter notebooks or, you know, anything like that, like, you know, Python is, you know, rich and embedded inside of that as well. So, you know, again, there's tons of opportunity there for folks to get involved and folks to get like up to speed with doing stuff without knowing tons of programming know-how and whatnot. And then you can do it really easily with Python.
Are there any gotchas that you or Brian came across in the months that the two of you have been live streaming your learning of Python? I know Clayton's a big fan of significant white space.
That's funny. Any gotchas? I don't think we came across any gotchas. We came across some surprising tidbits, though, for sure, in terms of like language constructs for things that we haven't seen before. So, for instance, you could put an else statement in your try catch, which I didn't know that was a thing. And I was like, why would I want an else statement in my try catch? But then, I'm like, oh, okay. After you see it, like, it makes sense to you, right? Because so for folks that are listening, if you think about like, if you visually imagine me writing code, right, and there's like a try catch family, which how most C-based languages like kind of structure the thing. So Python has try catch. I don't think they call it family, but they call it something else. Try catch family else. I was like, well, what is this for? Like what is happening here? And the same thing with the for loop, right? Like you have an else statement in your for loop in Python, which is kind of cool. So like what that does is if you're in your loop and you don't break, right? Like so if you don't exit the loop prematurely, then it'll run this section of code. But if you do exit prematurely, then it won't, right? So that's what the else does. But I'd never seen that before, right? And I never imagined a world where I'd need it. But then it's kind of like, well, you know, it's like the hammer and the nail thing, right? Like I got a hammer, like where the nail's at, kind of thing. So it was, I wouldn't call them gotchas, but I think just really interesting usage patterns that, again, now you've learned it in one language. Now I'm thinking, like if I was supposed to go back and write some JavaScript, like how would I express that? Or if I was supposed to go write that in some other language, like how would I try to express it over there? Do you guys? I should ask you guys. What language do you all like write code in?
I'm primarily .NET these days, .NET Core.
Okay.
I'm technically a front end tech lead doing. Well, I guess TypeScript with Angular, but this entire year I've only done Blazor. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So maybe by the time this comes out, Blazor will be out.
Mm-hmm.
I've stopped coding. I've been writing YAML files.
No.
Yeah, he's gone to the dark side.
I'm sorry.
The
I apologize.
DevOps world.
Okay.
So PowerShell.
Oh, wow.
Never could get into that.
Yeah. So being primarily in the .NET side and heavily JavaScript as well, and you and Brian kind of both mirroring that same experience. Are there any other mind shifts that you need to make in going into the Python world. Like you said, you don't really want to take your own baggage into a new language because you're going to start writing Python as a .NET developer or writing Python as a JavaScript developer.
Yeah, I would say so. I would tell you. I think it's good for us that we went backwards. Maybe I shouldn't say backwards. It's good for us that we went from like harder languages to something to like Python that's a lot more approachable, because there's so much less stuff in there. For us it was like really easy for us to pick it up, right? So it's like we're not adding code, we're removing code kind of thing, if that makes sense. Like, oh, there's no curly brace. Oh, there those go. Right? There's no semicolon. Oh, those are gone, right? Like you just like throw stuff away. Versus coming from the other direction, right? Like I can imagine going from like Python to C or C++ or to like, to Scala or something like that. And there's a lot more of a mind shift in terms of like, how do I have to think about structuring these things and where do these things go, right? What was good is that I definitely think a lot of what we already knew, just in terms of just how types work and how classes work, how functions work, like all that stuff translates over like almost one to one, right? It looks a little bit different. Obviously, the keywords are different and things of that nature. But in terms of like just the core concepts of how a lot of that stuff works, it's pretty much the same. Particularly too if you're most of a JavaScript person, because I think Python is a lot more of a dynamic language from that perspective versus like, a strongly typed language like C++ or C Sharp, where, I can't just like append properties to like a type, right? And I just, oh, you have a name now and you have an address now and you have a thing now. And but the other one doesn't, right? Like you can't do that. It's not like a thing. But you could do these in some of these other languages, right? And so for us coming down from a stricter dialect to a looser dialect, you know what I mean? I think it made it for us a little bit more, I guess, a little bit more approachable versus somebody that might be coming from the other way to be like, oh, wait, I can't like just put the thing here. Like, it's not working. Like, how do I do that? Like, oh man, I got to go write this whole class structure situation, man. Like, oh man, I got to write like 10 lines of code just to do like this little simple thing. So, I think for us, it worked out pretty well. And we're actually hoping that we could do some other languages too, maybe. I've been really interested in learning Go. If that, if we ever make time to do that, that'd be great.
That's what I really like about the modern languages or languages that continue to evolve, because it seems like they're all, we'll say, borrowing from one another. They're all implementing the same concepts, and so it's very familiar that once you understand this is the syntax for implementing the familiar context that you're familiar with, then that really helps and goes a long way in introducing oneself to a new language.
Yeah, it sure does. And I was talking to somebody just last week, and they were asking me, how do you, like, if you're already a beginner, right, and you're trying to upskill into like a language, like how do I do that in a comfortable way? And usually what I tell folks is, if you're familiar with something, like if you have a problem domain that you already understand how that works. So let's say, I don't know, like you're into baseball, right? Like you understand the structure of how baseball works. You know what bases are, you know how the field is, you know how many people are on the team, like you know how scores are made and tallied and fouls and stuff like that, right? So that means that if you look at a program that organizes baseball games, you'll probably understand the jargon, right? And you understand like the business domain of what's happening there. Just like if it was, I don't know, like race car driving or, cutting wood or whatever the case is, right? Like some topic X that you do, right? But you understand these things now versus like, oh man, like I don't understand how like TCP sockets work. And now I'm going to go and try and read the code for like a web server, right? And you'll be like, oh man, like I don't know how this online transport works, and two, I don't know the language. So that you're kind of setting yourself up for like a really long night, right?
Yeah.
Versus, you started digging into things that you're comfortable with. And so at least then you could be like, oh, okay, well, this must be where he's like, tabulating the scores, or this must be where like a player was injured and he had to remove them from the roster. Like you understand the domain and you can start to map those things mentally. So now as stuff is happening in the language, you feel like, oh, okay, well, this makes sense. Because I know, like in the real world, that's how this works.
Very cool. along your path, I'm sure you've come across some resources that really helped you guys out. Is there any that you would like to call out that other people might find also really useful as they sort of journey down the Python road?
Sure, definitely. I mean, I have to be super biased because I am a Microsoft employee. So we released a whole bunch of Python videos for free the other day. So one of them is called Python for Beginners, and the other one is called More Python for Beginners. It's a completely free video series. It's available on Channel 9. So channel9.msdn.com is our video portal for developers. It's also available on YouTube as well. The first one I think was 44 videos. So that's 44 videos at about like 5 minutes each or so. Yeah, it's a lot of video, man. But all about Python, right? Python, using Python with VS Code. And it's just about Python, right? It's not about we're not trying to sell you Azure or Visual Studio. But it's just Python. It's just introductory Python stuff. So it's really cool. Then we also have our learning platform, which is Microsoft Learn. Mm-hmm. And we have a bunch of Python stuff on there as well. Some of that is about machine learning. Some of it is about just core Python. Some of it is about like cognitive services or web development. Just, these are more like little modules about like, how can I do this or that or the other, right? And so those would be a couple of resources that I definitely tell you to go check out.
Yeah, I really like those learning paths that Microsoft has been doing. It's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, they've been great, and we're hoping to release some more soon. I think the goal is over a period of time, like you'll be able to go on there and like take certification or take courses to lead to certification and things of that nature. So it'd be great to see where it leads in the next year or so.
Very cool. So if folks want to listen to you, find out, maybe reach out to you, watch your Twitch, where can they find you on the internet?
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Cecil Phillip. I'm relatively active on Twitter. I'm always on there. I'll be streaming on the Microsoft Developer Channel starting probably by the time this comes out, because this is going to be in like 2 days. But we'll be streaming on the Microsoft Developer Channel. That's on Twitch. That's just twitch.tv/Microsoft Developer. Every Wednesday, me and Brian Clark, we stream on his Twitch channel about Python and things of that nature. You can also catch me on Channel 9. I run the On.net show, which we publish videos and content like twice a week about stuff happening in the world of .net. So that happens. And then other than that, just feel free to send me a message, or if you see me whenever we're allowed to go outside again, feel free to call up and say hello, and we can have a conversation.
Perfect. Yeah, and if we get to vote on the next series after you're done with Python, I would say that Go sounds probably the most exciting these days.
Yeah, that's I'd say that's definitely top of the list right now in terms of what a lot of folks want to learn about, particularly too with its strengths in creating distributed systems, and the whole Docker thing kind of made that like a big deal. So yeah, a lot of folks want to learn Go right now.
All right, thanks Cecil. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Sure, no problem, man. This has been fun.
That was Cecil Phillip. Cecil is a cloud advocate at Microsoft, podcaster, teacher, swimmer, and music lover. Born and raised in Antigua, he now calls Fort Lauderdale, Florida, home.
If you like this episode, please like, rate, and review on iTunes.
Find show notes, blog posts, and more at sixfiguredev.com.
And be sure to follow us on Twitter at sixfiguredev.
This has been another episode of the Six Figure Developer Podcast, helping others reach their potential. I am John Calloway.
I'm Clayton Hunt.
And I'm John Ash.